Champions Chess Tour. Semi-final match between ALIREZA FIROUZJA and Hikaru Nakamura, decisive game 5. FIROUZJA starts with the move e4, Nakamura answers with e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, knight f6. We have two knights defense on the board, d3, h6, not allowing white pieces to go to a square g5, c3, typical way of developing in this opening, and bishop c5, and now we're transposing into Jacobiana defense, opening b4, attacking Nakamura's bishop on c5. Usually the bishop goes here to b6, but Nakamura decides to remove it back to e7. Queen b3, the battery attack on the pawn on f7. Nakamura castles, a4. ALIREZA FIROUZJA is getting pressure on the black position on the queen side of the board. d6, opening the light squares for the light square bishop for Nakamura. Castle. Knight goes back to b8 with the idea to go c6 and d5. ALIREZA prevents it with the move queen a2, still c6, and bishop b3, retrieving the bishop ahead of time. a5, undermining white pawns on the queen side of the board. b5, knight develops to d7, and bishop goes to a nice diagonal a3, f8. Nakamura plays the knight on the edge of the board with the idea to put it on a nice square f4. FIROUZJA doesn't allow this to happen with the move g3 taking control of the square f4. Nakamura plays knight b6, rook e1, and kind of unusual looking move bishop h3. Although it makes sense because white light square bishop is on the other diagonal, on the other side of the board, and the squares, the light squares around the white king look pretty weak. King moves away to h1 with the idea to put the knight on g1 and knock this bishop out. Knight goes back to f6, knight g1, attacking the bishop on h3, and bishop removes to g4. Exchange of the pawns on c6 and f4, starting some activity on the king side of the board for FIROUZJA. Exchange of the pawns on f4. Now the white king really looks pretty weak, and black king is totally safe, and that's why this position is more pleasant for black. And they immediately start using the fact that the white king is not safe and move d5, undermining white center. If the king is not safe, you need to open up the position. If the opposite king is not safe, you need to open up the position as soon as possible. d5 accomplishes that. Queen goes to g2. Now the threat is to go e5 to attack the knight who protects the bishop and win the bishop on g4. Therefore, exchange of the pawns, and bishop goes back to e6. The best way for FIROUZJA to continue to play this position for a win is not to exchange pieces, but to keep as many of them as possible on the board, and he goes bishop c2. Rook gets into the game on e8, f5, attacking the bishop on e6, bishop c4, knight develops to f3, possible going to a square f5, e5. Hikaru goes back with the knight to d7, preventing white controlling the square of e5. FIROUZJA removes the bishop from this diagonal and moves it to another diagonal, c1, h6, where it would be more dangerous for black position. And now pawn on h6 is already under attack because the protecting pawn g7 is pinned. Therefore, king goes to h7, unpinning the pawn, and now h6 is protected. e5 looks dangerous with those two connected pawns marching forward. And f6 is a discovery check, threatening to win the piece. So the king has to go back to h8. Rook g1, threatening the checkmate on g7. Nakamura sees it and puts the rook to protect the pawn on g7. Rook g8. Knight d2, attacking the bishop on c4. And although it's protected, the bishop, the light square bishop, is very strong for Hikaru. He doesn't exchange it and puts it on a very nice diagonal on the square d5, and now the knight on f3 is pinned to the queen. Knight goes to a nice square e4, and immediately Hikaru undermines this knight with the move knight c5. Exchange the knights on c5, and now black bishops look absolutely monstrous in the middle of the board, putting their arrows towards white queen, white rook, white king. The rook moves away to e1. Knight gets into the action with the move knight c4. Bishop develops to f4. Rook b8 with the idea to put it on a second rank. Rook b2. And here ALIREZA makes a crucial mistake of the game. Queen h3. The move is logical from the point of view that now he wants to take the pawn on h6 with the bishop, and after pawn takes the bishop, queen takes h6 would be a checkmate. It's not so easy to understand immediately why queen h3 is a mistake until Hikaru Nakamura makes an absolutely brilliant move, queen h4. The brilliance of this move is that you just put your queen under attack, and it almost seemed like a mouse slip. But no, if you take the queen on h4, there is a checkmate with bishop takes f3. In the game, FIROUZJA played king g2. Hikaru Nakamura took the bishop on f4, and with an extra bishop and a totally dominant position, he would win this game, and ALIREZA FIROUZJA resigned, and Hikaru Nakamura won the match 3-2 and advanced to the final to face Magnus Carlsen.
Queen h4, oh my god, queen sacrifice, and after queen takes h4, bishop f3 would deliver a tremendous checkmate with both bishops